Thanksgiving is because of the time of year. Yeah, we can make the candles. So, actually that's a distraction, but I want to talk about the original Thanksgiving and then use that as an opportunity to reflect on the theology and spirituality of Thanksgiving and gratitude and contentment. And also kind of zigzag from that and the whole issue of spiritual emotions, which is greatly misunderstood. Because gratitude is a spiritual emotion, so anytime we think about gratitude, we have to understand it in the context of how we think about spiritual emotions and how that relates to our thinking and our behavior and so forth. But so in the so-called reforms of King Henry VIII, the number of church holidays was reduced to just 27. But the Puritan faction in the Church of England, who were concerned that the Anglican Church wasn't sufficiently reformed, they wanted to get rid of even the remaining 27 holidays and just have the Lord's Day, Sunday. And instead of the recurring holidays, they had times of days of Thanksgiving and days of fasting that were called in response to specific events, but didn't reoccur annually. So, for example, after the defeat of the Spanish Armada, there was days of Thanksgiving, and after the foil gunpowder plot, and then when there was trouble with plagues, they would have days of fasting. But these didn't recur annually; they were just specific to whatever year. And the Puritans took this notion with them when they came to these shores in the 1620s and 30s. They brought with them the tradition of days of Thanksgiving. And one of these occurred in 1621 when the settlers in Plymouth, Massachusetts celebrated with the local Indians following a winter of hardship and scarcity. And although this is often looked upon as the original Thanksgiving, it didn't actually become a national holiday at the time, because when the legacy of the Puritans, together with ideas about separation of church and state, meant that there was an antipathy to regular holidays, regular national holidays. So Christmas wasn't recognized as a federal holiday until 1870, as late as 1870, and Easter still has not been recognized as a federal holiday. But in 1863, Abraham Lincoln permanently established the fourth Thursday in November as being the holiday of Thanksgiving. And does anybody have any questions or comments about that little historical interlude? Okay, so I think that Thanksgiving is a wonderful opportunity, not just to have turkey and pumpkin pie, but to reflect on the spirituality of gratitude and the theology of thankfulness. And whenever we bring up this subject, a number of questions arise. People want to know if how to be thankful when everything in their life is going wrong, and whether contentment is a choice or an attitude or both, and how can we grow in gratitude. And gratitude is one of those virtues that many of us know we need to develop, but we just don't know how. And that's often the place that we find ourselves in when it comes to spiritual emotions. Spiritual emotions are, can anybody name some spiritual emotions? What are some spiritual emotions? Joy? Yes? Joy's, what? Hope? Joy, hope? Obviously gratitude. I have a list here of some spiritual emotions. Peace, contrition, joy, compassion, patience, love, empathy, hope. Somebody mentioned hope, gratitude. Now, these virtues, these virtues involve more. They involve more than emotion, but not less. For example, you can't have contrition unless you feel repentant for your sins at some level. Similarly, you can't have true patience if you're feeling agitated and frustrated. So, virtues contain an emotional element. Again, they're more than just emotion, but they're not less, because we're whole people, and the virtues impact us mentally, emotionally, even physically. And as modern people, we get uncomfortable about that because we tend to assume that emotions just happen to us like getting a cold. And there's even the idea, I've come across this a lot in popular media, although it's kind of implicit, that if you have to work at feeling a certain way, that it's somehow less authentic and less true to yourself as just the emotions that come naturally, spontaneously, without work, that's somehow more authentic. And what this tends to do to Christian discipleship is that we end up underappreciating the role of effort and struggle in the formation of spiritual emotions like gratitude. Culture and advertising tell so many times that in order to be natural and authentic, we have to just go with the flow of who we are naturally, like Elsa in Frozen. This modern idea of emotion is, sorry to the Frozen fans here, it's actually very, the movie is very rich source of worldview analysis, so I like it. And I also like the songs. But yeah, so what was I? Yes, so this modern idea of emotion is encapsulated in the difference between the different approaches in two daytime television programs. Those of my generation may remember watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And he gave children a vocabulary for talking about their feelings, but it was always in the context of moving toward emotional maturity. Whereas there was another television show at the same time and a little later, in fact, that was the Oprah Winfrey Show. Father Patrick and I were just talking about Oprah. And she treated all feelings as equally authentic, with no standard for adjudicating between emotions that are fitting versus those that are disordered. And this man here has analyzed Oprah's idea of emotions. Some of us know this man. Does anybody know this man? Who's this man? He's a friend of yours. Yeah, it's Ken Myers. He said the implication is that all powerful feelings are self-authenticating. According to the cultural ethos exploited and sustained by Oprah and countless others, no one need regard any feelings as disproportionate, misdirected, or disordered. So Oprah represents a very modern approach to emotion, which leaves no place for understanding how we arrive at our deepest and most permanent dispositions through hard work and struggle.
Wow. So what was his name again?
Ken Myers. Tim Myers. He's the host of the Marshall Audio Journal.
I've heard his voice many times, but I've never actually seen photos.
Okay. Yeah. Do you subscribe to the Marshall Audio Journal?
No.
I recommend everybody subscribe to it. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource of deep conversation and reflection. He interviews different authors and scholars, but he also gives his own insights. So anyway, some of you have heard me use this example before, but if you think of the joy that a wine connoisseur has or an art critic in a particularly special specimen of their craft, or if you think of the joy that a married couple feels when they're celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary, no one would deny that those feelings are the result of years of hard work and struggle and good habits and sacrifice. So we arrive at our deepest and most permanent dispositions and attitudes and emotions through hard work and training and habit-forming behaviors that may not always feel natural or authentic. And the same is true of gratitude. Left to ourselves to do just what comes spontaneously, we will always default to grumbling and complaining. Feeling grateful for little things is not natural to fallen man, but comes downstream of habit-forming practices that you do whether you feel like it or not. And the cool thing is that when you engage in these practices over time, they come to retrain what is natural and spontaneous for you. And these gratitude practices are formative even when you don't feel particularly thankful. Just like being kind to your spouse is formative, even if you don't feel like it, or coming to church is formative, even when you'd rather do something else. So gratitude practices could include things like gratitude journaling, making a point to thank people you appreciate, focusing on blessings you take for granted, refusal to verbalize complaints or criticisms regardless of how you feel. And there's obviously ways that we would want to qualify this, but in general, most of the complaints and criticisms that come out of our mouth just make us feel worse and don't have any therapeutic value. And then this might seem a bit strange, but it's very effective to imagine what your life would be like if certain things were taken away, and then making a point of thanking God for those things. And cognitive reframing, which I'll explain a little bit later. But the beauty of these behaviors is that they influence how you think and feel. And that's because of the web of multiple reciprocities linking feelings, behaviors, and thoughts. And I have a diagram to demonstrate this. This is the classic cognitive behavioral therapy triangle. It indicates that when you engage in correct behaviors that will affect your thoughts, but your thoughts will also affect how you feel and how you behave, etc. So there's this virtuous web between thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. And if you want to study this from an orthodox perspective, these are two books that discuss this from an orthodox perspective, both of them written by monks. Both of these are written by monks and discuss this web of multiple reciprocities linking our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. So it's important, therefore, to be self-conscious and aware of our thoughts and how our thoughts are often upstream of our emotions and even our behaviors. And that brings us back to gratitude. Because gratitude practices, even something as simple as doing a gratitude meditation every morning, is one simple way to redirect our thoughts towards what is life-giving. And I'll do this myself. So when I'm finding my mind slipping into patterns of grumbling, I'll use that to alert me to recall one thing that I'm grateful for. And that could be a big picture thing like salvation, or it could be a small thing, just like that I have food for dinner tonight. But through that method, I can redirect my mind away from grumbling to gratitude. And the goal is that over time, gratitude practices and gratitude thoughts become habitual, leading to the freedom of rightly ordered affection. Now, when talking about the freedom of rightly ordered affection, Christian theologians throughout the ages have identified the following progression. One, over many years of right behavior and obedience to God's command, we come to have good habits. And then over time, good habits lead to character traits or virtues. Good character traits result in us loving God's commands. And loving God's commands is correlated to rightly ordered affections, spiritual emotions, and properly aligned dispositions and attitudes. I say it's correlated, not caused, because these also are a web of multiple reciprocities. And they don't even go in a linear progression. This is not a linear cause and effect progression, because all of these stages feed off and reinforce the other stages. We can distinguish them, but they're not separable. And this results in true freedom. So really, this might seem really basic, and perhaps to all of you this is really basic, but we need to remind ourselves of this because there's such a problem in Christianity today with legalism. And the problem with legalism is that it stops at number one and thinks that that's enough. It stops at pedestrian obedience to God's commands and thinks that's enough. And so the legalist who wants to progress further in the faith simply adds more do's and don'ts, becoming over-scrupulous and fussy. And legalists don't understand that God actually calls us to a higher standard, namely to move from the first step to the later stages where God's commands are sweet and where, under the gentle tutelage of years of obedience, our affections are reformed and we come to love the ways of God, without, of course, leaving behind the earlier stages. But the sinister side of this is that because of sin, this whole process can work in reverse. And we get to a point where we do not find God's ways beautiful, but we actually come to delight in things that misfit our nature. And then our affections are disordered. And in our society today, the disordering of our affections is often packaged as freedom, even though it's the ultimate form of bondage. The ultimate form of bondage is when your affections are disordered and you perceive what is disordered as beautiful. So anyway, when our affections are rightly ordered, the result is spiritual emotion. And as mentioned earlier, spiritual emotions are virtues involved. Spiritual emotions are involved in virtues such as peace, contrition, joy, patience, love, and of course, gratitude. And again, these virtues involve more than just emotion, but not less. And because of the web of reciprocities that we looked at earlier, the way to develop virtuous feelings, such as gratitude, is through right behavior and life-giving thoughts. And that means practice. That means practice over and over again. In her book, this is Brene Brown, and she wrote a book called The Gifts of Imperfection, and she says in there that she used to assume that people who were naturally joyful had gratitude as a result. But then after thousands of hours of studying through research through interviews, she did thousands of hours of interviews, and she found that a surprising pattern began to unfold. And her research showed that joy always emerged out of a conscious choice to engage in gratitude activities, not the other way around. And she wrote this about her research. Without exception, every person I interviewed who described living a joyful life or who described themselves as joyful actively practiced gratitude and attributed their joyfulness to their gratitude practice. When it comes to gratitude, the word that jumped out at me throughout this research process is practice. And she distinguishes between gratitude practice and gratitude attitude. She says, just saying you need to have a gratitude attitude without actually practicing it is like saying you need to have an exercise attitude or a dieting attitude. What gratitude is an attitude, but it's an attitude that we create through engaging in right practices and life-giving cognitions. Life-giving cognitions or thoughts has to do with what is commanding our attention, what is our mind focused on. And I have a quote that I wanted to share from Peter Vishton about the relationship between gratitude and attention. He says, expressing gratitude serves to call your attention to the good things in your life. Almost everyone has both positive and negative aspects of their lives at any given time. It's just the nature of human existence. In many cases, our current happiness or unhappiness isn't based on the particular amount of good stuff and bad stuff in our lives. In many cases, our current happiness is strongly influenced by which stuff is commanding our attention and our thoughts. By thinking of the good things, parts for which you are presumably most grateful, those good things come to be more central to your thought life. So I thought we would take a little pause now to hear from all of you and to have any questions that might have occurred to you during this presentation so far. Yes.
Lately, I think about the concept of gratitude. Something that I struggle with historically. I realize that, or something that's helped me to think about it, is that gratitude is an emotion, but it's also practice, as you said. But it's helpful for me to remind that it's a very relational thing, right? And so it doesn't really make much sense. Like the highest form of gratitude is gratitude towards another person, right? And so if there's no relationship there, or if that relationship is muddled and distorted or kind of vague, you're just not going to enter into gratitude in the same way. And that's sort of, that to me, that plays into a lot of things that we have in Orthodox theology specifically, because we're not talking about it's just us and God. is God and the saints and his holy angels and all these beings that God has appointed to over various aspects of reality and the relationships that we have with one another. And like you said, this multi-area web relationships, right? So that kind of helps me to understand it a bit better. And I hope I'm not wrong. It's
Oh,
intuitive to me.
yeah, it's very intuitive. So when I'm trying to work on my gratitude, it's always relational. It's always bringing to mind all the people and beings that God has brought into my life. Actually, the next quote I was going to share actually kind of relates to that, how the Christian worldview, which is essentially relational, is, yeah, exactly. The Christian worldview creates the conditions for gratitude in a way that other belief systems do not. I have a quote to share about that, but first, does anybody else have any comments or questions? Yes, go ahead.
So I guess the inverse of the relational would be like atomized individualism, where you're looking to yourself or self-actualization, and I guess to me that would culminate in like will to power,
In what?
and like will to power, or something that's destructive that seems like it would be doing something for yourself that would make self-gratification, self-actualization. So everything is inward facing rather than outward facing.
Yeah, and many of the conceptual frameworks that we use in the modern world to think about ourselves and to think about society do kind of push us towards that atomized individualism. And our technology does as well, so we don't need things where in the past where we would need each other to survive and to do things. We're not dependent on each other in the same way because of our technology, and so we can live under the illusion that we don't need each other. And gratitude is a way to bring to mind that no, yes, not only do I need all the other people in my life, but I'm extremely grateful to God for them. But that sense of dependency on each other can be eclipsed, both because of the amenities of the modern world, but also because of the different conceptual templates that have been used to organize how we think about ourselves in the modern world. You mentioned like the Nietzschean idea of will to power, and there's numerous others as well. Yeah, really good point. Yeah.
Rob, can you guys give a concrete example of that where gratitude is focused inwardly, like a hypothetical, like will to power, like what, can you flesh that out? What would be a tangible, concrete expression of that?
I don't know if I can think of anything, because true gratitude is always outward directed. So I can't think of any example.
I think like it's a distortion of gratitude. It's for will to power. I have the power to do this to make myself feel better. I'm grateful for my own capabilities to use my will to create the circumstances and situation that I want that's pleasing to me. But it never ends up being pleasing to me, just ends up falling apart. But it's like an inverse of the self-love. It's kind of sociopathy. Everybody is just non-player characters to get what you want, but you can have all the food in the world and never be sated. So you're missing the component of the relation.
Yeah, exactly. So we have this instinct, we have this God-given instinct for gratitude, but when that that can misfire and turn into the inverse, which is self-love and egocentricity. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Well, I have a few more things to share. Just a few little cool facts about gratitude. Oh yes.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could actually pull back up that the triangle graph you had.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit more. Could you give some concrete examples of those three pillars there?
To do with like gratitude?
Yeah, so what would that look like in real life, right? So,
Yeah.
thoughts, right? So, how, you're thinking about something specific, right? And then that affects how you feel. What's going on?
So here, this is from next week's talk, but these are some examples of how the three levels in the triangle will play out in gratitude. So there's the aspect of the mind where we recognize what's good in our life, acknowledge that the source of goodness lies outside the self. And to be grateful is to recognize one's debt to others and ultimately to God for the good things He's given us that we do not deserve. And also reframing to encourage life-giving thoughts. And then on the behavioral side, gratitude involves choosing to acknowledge the grounds for gratitude, choosing to give thanks and engage in some of these practices that I mentioned or other practices that people do. And then the feelings would involve feeling thankful and the type of dispositions that come from cultivating feelings of appreciation. And often the feeling level will happen just as a byproduct of engaging in right cognitions and behavior. And the reason I put the heart there with feeling is because researchers at the Institute of Heart Math have found that when you focus on things you appreciate and you're grateful for, our heart rate actually goes into a state of coherence, known as heart rate variability, where instead of this steady rhythm like a metronome, it's more varied like the gentle waves of the seashore. And I was so intrigued by this, I actually got a device that measures my own heart rate variability. And it's true when you are feeling grateful, which you can cultivate through right actions and right cognitions, the result is a healthier heart rate. So does that help to kind of give a concrete example of how the levels in the triangle will, angles in the triangle? Anyway. What's that?
That's all.
Okay, does that answer your question?
More or less.
Yes.
For examples, this is something I've been trying recently. So, part of my day is the morning, get out of the house in the morning. And so I try to as soon as we get to the car, I try to say thanks you to my kids for whatever. Thank you for putting my stuff in the car. Please find your shoes or whatever. This is I could give a litany of things that did not go well. You should have done this or so. And then our drive here is there's this really pretty part on 50 where you can see the mountains, and there's this farmhouse. So it's sunrise, and sometimes the clouds are really pretty. So trying to draw the kids' attention, look at the mountains today, look at the fog today, and saying thank you to God for that. And even silly things going to the fields and we hit every red, it's my anxiety starts rising. And so just the green lights, they do, just trying to think of anything. And I've noticed a significant difference
Oh, that's beautiful. And does it make a difference to the whole atmosphere in the car as well?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You had a question, Jim?
No, I was just going to think about an example of kind of going the wrong way with those connections. I had just a recent team meeting in the last week or so where I had one of my teammates was just dominating the discussion in the meeting. And I was thinking, oh man, I wish he would just stop talking. And by the end of the meeting, I was really irritated. So the thoughts were progressing into irritation and frustration. And the next meeting, those thoughts and emotions turned into I spoke to him in an angry way.
Oh.
So it went from thought to emotion to behavior, and I had to apologize in front of the team and then call him later to apologize. So, the thought, emotion, behavior can move in the wrong direction as well as, a healthy direction. And I did express gratitude. I mean, there's a lot to be grateful for this kind of emotions in the team. I let those thoughts and emotions go in the wrong direction rather than in a grateful direction.
Yeah, it can become a vicious cycle rather than a virtuous cycle, because our thoughts are so powerful in what we feel and then how we behave. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Question for you, Ron. I've listened to some Holy Spirits, but not nearly as much as some other people in this room. So I'm kind of a beginner, but my question is this: when you allow yourself to engage with the thought, you're acting as the body for the spirit of that thought. And when you act on it, then you've actually taken steps to align your will with that spirit's will, and you're manifesting its power and presence in the world. So there's a spiritual aspect to this practice that once you figure it out and you don't want to be a patsy anymore, then it's just like that. It's very simple. If you don't want to be engaged with that thing, make it go away, then you have to be mindful of your thoughts first and how they carry over into a heart rate, magnetic field, the actions that you do, the voice that you're using to speak to that other person. When you engage in that way, it can turn the relationship south or north, either way. And when you mention legalism, as an ex-Roman Catholic, I know that they don't do community meals. They're very isolated, atomized. Individuals get ignored, excluded. Sometimes you can go spend years and years at a parish and never make friends. They're not inclusive of, they're not real good at community. And that legalism, sometimes you're not capable of progressing beyond that checklist because of some problem with development. And I think it's related to this word autistic, because autism is about not being able to communicate or be, in relationship properly. So there's so many connections with what you're saying and what I've observed. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. I think of the Christian life like the lifespan of an individual. When you're a toddler, you need to just have all the rules and know where the boundaries are, but eventually they internalize those rules and leads to character traits. But that doesn't mean you can leave behind all the rules and good habits. So sometimes the legalists I've known, they don't understand that God actually calls us to a higher standard, which is the right ordering of our affections. But for about 4 minutes. Well, okay, I just wanted to share. We'll skip that. So why doesn't everybody practice gratitude? If it's healthy for us, it helps us to feel happier. And in his book, The Progress Paradox, the economist's great Easter book offered an interesting explanation for why we grumble so much. He observed that as our lives become collectively more prosperous, our expectations have risen, resulting in more things to be unhappy about. Our comforts provide an endless array of new things to disappoint and frustrate us. That's key. Our comforts provide an endless array of new things to disappoint and frustrate us. And when progress occurs on a culture-wide level, not only do our expectations go up, but the baseline for normality rises to such an extent that it becomes easy to begin overlooking how blessed we are in terms of commonplace blessings. And one of the ways to escape from this trap is to begin practicing gratitude for little things that we would normally take for granted, the commonplace blessings. It's easy to be grateful for things that are out of the ordinary, like a bonus from work, or an extra special meal, or an appreciative letter from a friend that we haven't seen in years. But we have to really work to cultivate gratitude for commonplace blessings that we've grown used to. And I've made a list of these, some of them. And the goal is to become grateful for ordinary things precisely because they happen frequently enough to become normal and ordinary. And I've just put down a few things. Maybe some of us don't have all these things on the list, but even if your life is characterized by 2/3 or half of the things on this list, that is grounds for extreme gratitude, especially given the fact that that the historical norm is not to have access to all these blessings. And the Apostle Paul told Timothy, but if we have food and clothing with these, let us be content. And if we have more than just food and clothing, of all these wonderful things and more, that's grounds for profound gratitude. I know we've run out of time, but if I could just share one more quote, this gets back to your point, and then we'll end. The constitutionally grateful person has a shield. This volume was produced by Oxford University Press. They brought, in 2004, they brought scholars from all different specialities to submit essays on gratitude, from theology, neuroscience, history, psychology, theology. All these scholars presented chapters for this book, and Robert Roberts presented a chapter called The Psychology of Gratitude, and this quote is from that. A constitutionally grateful person has a shield against debilitating regrets because he or she is inclined to dwell on the favorable rather than the regretful. A person with gratitude readiness will tend to see what is good in situations and to notice less what is bad. The kind of unfortunate actions and events that make the constitutionally regretful person miserable may have occurred in the grateful one's life as well, but the grateful person can move on from them because his or her mind is tuned to happier things. Grateful people tend to be satisfied with what they have, and so are less susceptible to such emotions as disappointment, regret, and frustration. People who believe in God as he is conceived in Christianity, this is where the worldview comes in. People who believe in God as he is conceived in Christianity have an even more powerful resource for transcending many of the circumstances that disappoint, frustrate, and anger most of us. In consequence, grateful people, whether religious or not, will be less prone to emotions such as anger, resentment, envy, and bitterness that tend to undermine happy social relations. Thank you very much.
Great. That was great. Thank you so